Mongoose sent me a new bike to review, a utility bike. And as always, I don't accept payment for reviews. Everything you see here is based on my experience with the product. And lately in my reviews, I haven't been doing too much unboxing or assembly. My reasoning is that that's usually pretty straightforward. Put on the handlebars and the front wheel, and then install the pedals. That's usually about how it goes. But with this bike, it's more intensive and the instructions a bit vague and incomplete. And that can lead to confusion and unnecessary work. Like when I noticed the lower rack comes from the factory with the chain ran through the middle, so I broke the chain, took the rack out and put the chain back together, and then discovered it was that way on purpose. Lesson learned and now shared, though I still fault those instructions. Because they do show that there are 4 bolts to assemble the lower rack, but they don't mention that there are 2 different sizes, a short and a long. And the short needs to be used on the front of the rack, a lesson I learned when things started looking not right. And by the way, during all my miscues getting this assembled, I figured out that if I tilt the rack up in the front, loosely put in those bolts, it makes putting the back together a breeze. But it wasn't just the rack that confused me, because there's another packet of hardware, and it's not mentioned at all. And this is a spring for the front wheel. And this is a utility bike, and it can have 130 pounds on the back, so the front wheel flopping around could be bad. The kit to keep that from happening, it's a headless bolt and nut, a spring cover, and 2 brackets. The headless bolt, it threads into a hole on the underside of the down tube, and there's a nut that threads onto that, and it snugs a bracket against the frame. The other bracket mounts to the front fender bolt, and I wasn't sure of the orientation for either of these brackets, up or down, so I ended up with the spring hole part being up, and it looks proper, and it works. The front wheel now springs back to a centered position when up on the stand. And I was left with 2 random screws, and I had to reach out to Mongoose to figure out where these go, and it turns out they're for use on the reflectors. That's a quick rundown of the unique elements that weren't mentioned in the instructions for the assembly of this Mongoose Envoy utility bike, which, once put together, is long. By far, not only the longest bike that I've reviewed, but a frame design, one that has to accommodate all these racks, unlike anything I've ever owned. And that made me think that this ride might be bizarre, but it's really not that far off from a standard commuter or city bike. And even though the bike weighs over 52 pounds, I wouldn't guess that because it's acceptably easy to pedal. It's also smoother than I expected, at least for a bike with a rigid fork. I wouldn't say this could handle rough terrain, but back alleys and city streets, areas that quickly wear down my resolve on bikes with rigid forks, not so bad on this one. When I envision a roll for a bike like this, I think short rides with lots of stops. So in my mind at least, I started thinking I would wear down quickly if I started running up a lot of continuous miles, but that's not the case. For the past week, this has been my main bike and it's been all over town. And I've yet to reach a point of fatigue with it. And I've kind of developed a love for it, which is shocking because initially I thought I would have little interest in this bike. It's been fun and easy to ride. Now I did say that the experience is not far off from normal, but there is one thing that's different, and it's due to the bike's length. On turns, especially at speed, it likes some extra ground. And that has to be remembered when cutting through tight spaces. All due to the longer wheelbase, and that back wheel, it's on out there. So I brought along a set of parking cones, and I set them up as sort of a slalom course to see what this will do in comparison to the normal bikes that I ride. First, parking space width, and this is no problem and just about the length of the bike. So I cut the gap down further and set the cones to be the length of the actual wheelbase. Again, doable. And then I got overly confident and I spread the cones out to a single pace spacing, which is about a meter, a little over 3 feet. And I can do this on some of my other bikes, less so on the Envoy. So the longer wheelbase does take a bit away from the agility, and for some reason I was thinking that would make it bad at climbing. It's not the best climber, but it's far from the worst that I've ridden. I would say this is a pleasantly average rider. Better than I expected given the weight and the unknowns going in. And I somewhat dig the looks too. It doesn't look cheap, and that's a good thing because it costs around $730. And by the way, on that price, Mongoose told me they currently have a 10% off coupon that runs until the end of the year, so the end of 2019. I'll put a link down in the description. One note on that link, it's an Amazon link, and I'm part of the Amazon affiliate program, so I earn commissions on purchases through my links, but that's an Amazon thing, not Mongoose, but I want to be transparent. All that said, let me do a rundown of the details and see what makes this come together to be more rideable than I anticipated. Up top, an Exposure branded threadless headset, and this makes sense because Mongoose is into BMX and Exposure makes a lot of BMX components. Arch style handlebars, actually a double bar design. And this should give all the mounting spots needed for a utility or delivery rider, lights, phone, GPS, and so on. Bar equipment, like the grips, these are comfort grips. They're okay, not great, but okay. The trigger shifters are Shimano Easy Fire, 3-speed on the left and 8 on the right. And here's the fork, thick by rigid fork standards, very utilitarian. The bike specs say 4 bottle holder mounts, and it looks like 2 of those are up on the fork. The wheels are both quick release, and the hubs, like up top, Exposure branded. The 32-hole rims are double wall alloy with stainless steel spokes. Street tread for the 26 by 2.35 tires. I like these, good and beefy, and no doubt part of the ride smoothness. And wrapped around those tires, plastic fenders, piano black, and I haven't heard any noise or signs of tire contact, so these are doing well so far. Another look at that spring up front. I wish I had one of these on some of my other bikes. The Envoy's frame is aluminum. They call it Tectonic T1 and it has internal cable routing. The top tube and the down tube both contour and taper, and considering all the tubes on this bike, they managed to put it together without it looking blocky. Drivetrain wise, standard Mongoose polymer pedals are mounted to Exposure 170mm alloy crank arms. Triple chain rings, 42, 32, 22, and a Trinity TX front derailleur. There's a quick release seat clamp and a Mongoose branded saddle that thus far has been pretty comfortable, and the saddle also has a mounting bar underneath. And there's lots of mounting points and places to keep cargo like the pannier backs. They have a Velcro secured flap, 24 by 16 by 6 inches worth of space. They can hold 20 pounds and they have a tablet friendly pouch, spots for phones, pens, etc. The zippers are rubberized and weather resistant. And each pannier can act as a bag with a carry handle, and they're mounted to the rack via 5 hooks, quick and easy to get on and off the bike. Removed, we can see the core of the Envoy's cargo capacity. That lower rack, it's 20 inches wide, not much wider than the pedal width, but there is a clearance learning curve, at least for the first few miles. With all this rack space, there's plenty of options for cargo, and the upper rack alone can carry 90 pounds. Here you can see the rear fender sandwiched between those racks and all the frame tubes. And that ultra long chain, it reaches all the way back to a Shimano Altus rear derailleur. And sitting on the rear Exposure hub is an 8-speed cassette. All the cabling is Jaguar branded, and the mechanical disc brakes Mongoose branded, and I know there will be calls for hydraulics at this over $700 price. But I've heard from bike couriers that say they prefer mechanical brakes because they're easier to maintenance. Either way, there's a 180mm rotor up front and 160 in the rear. And I haven't had any problems stopping the bike yet, but in an upcoming video I'm going to load this to max cargo capacity and then we'll see how these brakes do. And there you have it, long and more usable than I expected. I'm kind of into this. On every bike there's stuff that pulls me in and other areas that maybe could use a bit of improvement. And on this one, I'll say the good, it's very capable. And it's a smooth ride with good gearing. My room for improvement list would include the EasyFire trigger shifters. At this price I think they could have done better. And the graphics, the cheap Mongoose stickers, at least I can peel them off. And I'd like to see side-specific pannier bags just so the logos line up. All things considered, this is kind of neat, right? Comment below, let me know what you think, and let me know, would you ride a utility bike? Thanks for watching, have a great day, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button.